The Supreme Court says a Pennsylvania high school violated a student's First Amendment rights. The case stemmed from a cheerleader's profanity-laced Snapchat video. SCOTUS ruled in favor of the teen 8-1, saying that students do not, quote, shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression even at the schoolhouse gate.
Joining us now to discuss is Kim Iversen, the host of the Kim Iversen Show. Kim, what do you think? Her First Amendment rights have been restored. How do you feel about this ruling?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent ruling. Of course, leave it up to Clarence Thomas to be the lone dissenter who's acting like an old grandpa in the case, right? He's like, well, they can exert their parental rights on her, essentially, because the big thing in question, the big idea in question is whether or not a school has the right to regulate speech off campus. And in some circumstances, the Supreme Court has ruled in previous instances that they can, that at times the school has to act as a parental sort of guardian over the student because the parents aren't around. So they're sort of the de facto parents. And they've said that, if it's a really disruptive thing that they're doing off campus, then they should be able to be regulated by the school itself. But in this particular instance, I don't think I'm really all that shocked by this ruling, to be quite honest with you. I feel like the Supreme Court often, as conservative as they are on business issues, when it comes to social issues or freedom of speech especially, John Roberts is a huge proponent of freedom of speech, and he's very pro-business, but he's also very pro-freedom of speech. So, I'm not really surprised by this ruling at all for them to say you don't leave your First Amendment rights at the front door or at the door when you leave the schoolhouse, and you certainly don't shed them just because you're a minor. So I think this was a really good ruling. I don't think I'm really that surprised.
Yeah, I agree with you. The Supreme Court, particularly the Roberts Court, the Supreme Court over time has gotten more pro-First Amendment, or has taken a broader view of the speech protected by the First Amendment in a way that I'm very much in favor of. There has been a little bit of a difference in how much protection of college students' First Amendment rights. That's enjoyed a lot of protection, whereas, just as you said, Kim, at the K through 12 level, it's been a little bit more uncertain. I remember the Bong Hits for Jesus case, where they did restrict the ability of students in a kind of odd way to make this like inane statement going on during a school function. So this really is something, like you said, not so surprising, but I think something to celebrate, right? That there is some pushback now on how far a school can go to like control students' lives, even outside the school itself.
It wasn't really clear to me if this is only for public schools. Mm-hmm. Or if this also would affect private schools. And that's I'd have to go back and read the case, but it wasn't really clear to me if this is an instance of, well, because public schools are an extension of the government, right, then you therefore cannot be regulated by the government. So I'm not really sure. Do you know is this just public schools?
I assume it's just going to be public schools. It might, some private schools take enough public money that sometimes a court would say, well, then they have to meet some kind of obligation, et cetera, something like that. Right. So we'll see. You mentioned Justice Clarence Thomas. In his dissent, Thomas wrote, the majority fails to consider whether schools often will have more authority, not less, to discipline students who transmit speech through social media. Thomas is very hit or miss for me. I think this was a big miss. What do you think about Thomas's dissent here?
Yeah, he sounds like an old curmudgeon-y grandpa on his dissent. He's like, well, at what point can we be parents to these children? And at what point do we not have this ability? He does bring up some good points. However, he says, look, the schools are allowed to regulate even when it's off-campus activity, like in the event of truancy. So if you're not there, obviously it's not on school campus, but the school has the ability to still regulate you and punish you in that way. And I think he also brings up somewhat of a good point when he talks about, morale or school spirit or something, with this cheerleader kind of obviously sharing her grievance about what had happened. His point was, well, this can be considered disruptive because she's lowering morale. But from a free speech perspective, we need to have the right to criticize our government, to criticize authority, to criticize the establishment, whoever it might be, without being accused of for one, like it often happens of not being a patriot or not loving your country or not loving, I guess, your school in this situation, not having enough school spirit. There's got to be that line. And so it is, of course, I also disagree with Clarence Thomas and his dissent and his disagreement of this case. But yeah, I mean, he kind of sounds like an old grandpa where he's like, we got to be able to parent these children.
Justice Thomas wants to bring back paddling. Surprise, surprise.
Right.
Another ruling we want to discuss, Kim. The Supreme Court ruled on a case between union organizers and California farms. In a 6-3 vote, the court struck down a regulation that gave union organizers permission to visit farm workers in the fields. The court ruled that the measure, which was passed in 1975, violated growers' private property rights. Now, I did my radar on this, and I happen to fundamentally disagree here because of the nature of the work, like the original ruling stated, and where these farm workers are located. It's incredibly difficult to have conversations with them about their organizing rights, about their rights to collective bargaining, anywhere but the farms. And it's kind of a weird thing where they say that the meeting of labor organizers with workers is taking of the property and that they should be, justly compensated for that. I find it hard to believe that meeting with them at lunch, before or after work, just utilizing a portion of the property to do so, is taking of the property. I'd love to hear what you think about this one.
Yeah, this is a really complicated case, and I really wish people would. It's really not that complicated, but it seems complicated to people. So a lot of people don't pay any attention to these types of cases, and I wish people would pay attention more to these cases than they do to, let's say, the cheerleading case. But of course, the cheerleading case is what's making all of the news, and this is really pretty much the way it's been since the dawn of time. I mean, if you look back at 2013, for example, when the Supreme Court was debating whether or not we should allow gay marriage, people focused on that, and they didn't pay any attention to them throwing out antitrust class action lawsuits. So we have an extremely pro-business SCOTUS, and it has been increasingly pro-business ever since Roberts. This became the Roberts Court, George Bush putting in these really pro-business justices on the bench. And that is actually a bigger problem and a bigger issue for this country than all of these social issues that come up with the court. The court has, through pressure, is able to make, they will change. And we have made progress with the Supreme Court when it comes to social issues. But when it comes to business, we have gone backwards. And in this particular case, what they're saying is that union organizers are essentially violating the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment by proxy, because the Fifth Amendment says that the government can't seize or occupy or take your property. And the 14th Amendment makes it to where it's not just the federal government, but it's also the states. So the states can't do this to you. A state officer can't do this to you. And in this case, they're saying the state of California is allowing these unions to essentially take access to your property during 3 hours a day, 120 days a year. So it's like you said, before lunch or before work, at lunch, and after work. To me, obviously, this is a stretch of the meaning of taking or occupying property. They're not putting up pop-up tents and saying we're now like occupying this space for this particular period of time. They're instead just granted access. And I think that's a very different thing than giving property to the state or the state forcibly taking that property. It is instead saying, just like the state has regulators that want to come and inspect, and if they're coming to inspect your business, they will show up unannounced, very unwelcome to most business owners, but they're granted access to your property, whether you like it or not. But the government's allowing this to happen in order to regulate or to inspect. And so to me, this is more of a granting access. They're not allowing businesses to regulate that access, rather than it is, you're giving that you're forcibly you're forcing these business owners to give their land to the government. And in which case, if you're not going to compensate them, then it's unconstitutional. So I think it's a stretch. But again, this is an extremely pro-business Supreme Court. They stretch every single sort of of meaning, and they, I believe, interpret things in a way that is just pro-business, even when it's a total stretch. And this is just more to be seen, and people should be paying way more attention to this. This has larger implications for our country than all of the social issues that everybody pays attention to. Those things are going to change no matter what. But these business things are going to be hindering the people, unable to make any progress. We can't sue companies as easily as we could. We've got Citizens United, where corporations are just running amok with all the money they're spending, outspending the average person. I mean, this is a disaster.
I actually see some consistency between these two rulings, because it's First Amendment and Fifth Amendment, both things to prevent the government from infringing on your rights, your property, and speech, both being those. But we can have disagreement on that. That's okay. Kim, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Next on Rising, investigative reporter at The Intercept, Ken Klippenstein, discusses his latest piece on leaked military training documents when Rising returns.